Something happened over the weekend, and it's really generated a lot of people, a lot of freakouts from the Trump administration. A judge has blocked Elon Musk from the Treasury, and they are not happy. The folks there in the Trump administration, as a matter of fact, the higher ups like JD Vance, Elon Musk, coming out and now questioning the validity of the court system, saying, hey, what right did they have to tell us? There are people, commenting, oh, they should just ignore that order. They should just do what they want to do anyway. And I worry about perhaps having some type of, well, we already should have a constitutional crisis when you look at, taking away financial decisions from Congress, and now the potential that they're going to ignore court orders, or that they're going to, as Elon Musk says, we should impeach the judge who came down on the wrong side of his decision. Are we scared yet, or am I just freaking out for nothing?
Well, it depends on where you sit, right?
I mean, I don't want
let's
to be
back up.
hysterical about it, but that really
Yeah,
worries me a little bit.
let's back up a step here, okay? So we know that this is in the last 3 weeks, there have been a number of court decisions that have at least, man, most of these have been temporary, okay,
Mm-hmm.
stopped a lot of Trump actions. I mean, it was USAID, kibosh put on that. The to some degree, the birthright citizenship, the letting go of, or excuse me, the offer of a hiring freeze, slash buyout for federal workers. I mean, this has just been a continuum of court, interventions in some of these executive actions. So we can expect that to continue. That's number one. Number two, this doesn't come as a surprise. All this back and forth between the executive and judicial does not come as any surprise to anybody in Washington nor in Congress. Why? One simple reason. Democrats, to their dismay, as you well know, lost every lever of power in Washington. I mean, the House, the Senate, the White House. What does that mean? It means they have no power of subpoena, for example, in the Congress. They have no power to call special investigative hearings. So what does that mean? That means those responsibilities that Democrats would likely initiate, and both parties have done this over the years, over various administrations, would initiate, cannot be done right now. So where does the power then fall, Kim? For the most part right now, to the courts. And who are going to be the major players in that? Well, we're already seeing. Most of it's going to come, a lot of the big actions are going to come from state attorneys general in the blue states. And so, for example, last week, that happened, 17 or 18 of them got together and did this. So we can expect this to continue. And the reality of it is, this is a long-standing battle between the executive branch and the other two branches of government over who gets to have say about what. It's just certainly more dramatic now because of really the unprecedented pace and scope of actions the Trump administration has taken, which, by the way, are much faster and much bigger than they were, of course, during Trump version 1. So that's where we are. Are some people scared? Yes. Is the court system intervening? Yes. Are all these actions going to be ignored? Right now, we don't have evidence of that. We don't see, the Trump people just ram-riding over these things. And this is going to play out. I will tell you this last piece. I really think that there is some you're driving and you're going up and down those hills in San Francisco, and you pretty much have 1 foot over the brake the whole time, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I think a lot of Republicans, particularly Senate Republicans, are right now. It's okay, you're going to take these actions, but we're going to try to put a stop to a lot of this. That is the Democrats and the courts. And Republicans are saying, look, you try to circumvent the court system, that's when we're going to start pumping the brakes.
I don't remember in history, and maybe because I wasn't paying attention or I wasn't as worried about it or the alarm bells weren't going off, I don't remember a time when someone from the executive branch questioned the validity of someone from the judicial branch. But perhaps it has happened throughout history, and my alarm bells weren't going off.
Well, you don't have to look very far back. When the Trump appointees to SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, right, started issuing decisions early in the Biden administration that, weren't favorable. First, they didn't come from the White House. First, it came from Congress, you may remember, expand the court. The courts become illegitimate. That word was
Sure.
used repeatedly, right? So there were questions about, because of the,
Yeah.
perceived ideological and legal drift of the court. There were a
Hmm.
lot of questions raised, and that is not uncommon. But I think it certainly has accelerated with the, as we've seen in other areas, Kim, with
Yeah.
the partisan nature of our current politics.
We have more tariffs being slapped down this morning by President Trump on steel, on aluminum, and apparently some retaliatory tariffs as well. And it looks like China is the recipient of most of this. Can you talk about the significance of a trade war with China in particular?
Well, to say we're are or are not in a trade war with China, I think you can say at this point it's either low level or medium level almost all the time. What do I
Yeah.
mean by that? It's like both sides are calibrating what they can get away with, how they can use it for leverage, and not just with each other, by the way, but what signals that sends about what clearly now has become a bipolar political world with one side led by China and one side led by the U.S. Now, when it comes to specifics on metals, that is steel especially, but also aluminum, this was going on too, remember, during the Biden administration. And there's been a lot of concern about the United States being able to retain industrial capacity to meet our strategic needs and economic needs. And there's no getting away from the fact, because my mom came from the steel areas in Pennsylvania and Ohio. That industry's really suffered for a long time. And cheaper imports have really put a lot of the steel makers out of business, which is why you're seeing the major legal questions even right now about other nations being able to come in and buy U.S. steel manufacturers. So I think the steel has always been, for many decades, sort of like the canary in the coal mine, right? It's like, if we can't save our steel industry, there's something about that. That's what we make cars out of. That's frankly what we make tanks out of.
Yeah.
So I think you're going to see steel and aluminum is going to get a lot of the headlines. It's broader than that, but I would not be surprised to see those tariffs go into effect.
I think that China is going to put tariffs on the United States for the type of rare earth metals that are needed to make chips and high tech items. So it may be that we'll see the cost of what the new iPhone or whatever gadget we're looking for go up.
Well, it could be,
Yeah.
and then what's going to be interesting is to see how this all plays out, because we think so much about China and the U.S., but there's a lot of other people that manufacture things, and what's
Yeah.
happened often in the past is what happens often with economics. Some
Hmm.
other nations start stepping in, right? Hey, you know what? We could make the iPhone for you cheaper than you can get it done in China right now, right?
Yeah.
So I think you're going to see a lot of horse trading going on in a lot of these areas. But real quick on the rarefied minerals thing, that's why you're going to hear a lot, even this week, about Ukraine's massive resources in
Yeah.
so-called rare earth minerals and how that's going to play out with the whole Russian-Ukraine war. Because Zelensky over the weekend said, we're ready to make a deal with the U.S. to help guarantee our security. And yes, give you access to rare earth minerals, which, by the way, one other thing about that that's very important strategically is some of the ground that the Russia has taken inside Ukraine. Reportedly, about half of the really exclusive rare earth minerals are under that newly acquired, quote unquote, Russian territory. So
Hmm.
that's why getting that deal done and getting Russia to back out of some of those regions is very important, not just for the U.S., but for the entire Western world dependent on those kind of minerals.
It's interesting that now we're to the point where we're only going to help Ukraine if it benefits us financially. If because we want a thing from them. Where it seemed like in the past we were helping because that's what America does as far as, the spread of democracy and tamping down the spread of communism and Russia being our enemy and all of these things and the land grab happening, that we were in it for different reasons. And now it's a transactional thing. Oh, you can give us rare earth minerals? Great. Then we'll give you some weapons and help you out.
Yeah, I think it's going to be mixed. I don't think there's any question about it. But regardless of which administration is in there, Americans have just shown a declining interest in long-term conflicts, right?
Hmm.
It doesn't matter whether it was in Afghanistan or any other part of the world. I think part of the challenge becomes sustaining a presence and also foreign aid, be it military or domestic, over a long period of time. And I think that's part of the pure political nature of modern politics. You know, you can do it for a year, you can do it for a couple of years, when you start getting to a half decade plus, it becomes more challenging. So let's just see where this plays out. I think you're going to see, the way it looks right now, you could see some major movement in the Ukrainian-Russian situation, I think, in the next few weeks, certainly the next few months.
Gary, I thought it was just all it would take was one phone call. No,
Right,
no, no. One phone call, it's
right.
over. Done.
Well, I think if anybody at this juncture who doesn't just use, I like to use the word calibrate, right? If you don't calibrate pretty much everything that comes from Donald Trump, it doesn't matter whether it's a weekend tweet or something out of the Oval
Yeah.
Office. You just got to do that, right? I mean, that's just the reality of it. It's sort of like certain sports figures or certain sports coaches. I'm not trying to trivialize the Oval in any sense, but you just take it with a grain of salt. Well, let's see what happens, when the stuff actually comes out next week. So that's where we are. And I think it's important, though, that calibration is important because otherwise you just end up getting whipsawed and you freak out at midnight when maybe the freak out wasn't warranted.
Right. I completely understand. You mentioned conflict, and it brings me kind of back to during the election when there was a move for Palestinian Americans to not vote for Harris because of the Harris Biden stance on selling weaponry to Israel. And the Palestinian Americans thought, how can we vote for people who are selling weapons that are killing our family members in the Gaza area? And while I understood that, I still felt like it was, the lesser of two evils. And now we have the State Department announcing $7 billion in an arms sale to Israel. Congress had blocked this deal. Now they're moving forward. We had Trump's, make the Gaza area into the Mediterranean of the Middle East. I wonder if people that thought originally that Trump would somehow be better or they were making a statement against the selling of arms, if they have regrets, because now it does seem that it's even worse.
Yeah, well, okay, two things here. Let's start with the politics of it. Okay, everybody is waiting for the polling that's going to undoubtedly happen in a lot of these specific issues. And the one you're referring to, I have no doubt that in the next few weeks there's going to be polling operations that go in to some of those areas, especially in the northern tier of states, Michigan and et cetera, where large cadres of folks who were sympathetic to the Palestinian cause said that they, to your point, were abandoning the Harris-Biden ticket. And it's going to be interesting to see how they feel about it now. I mean, that polling, I'm sure we're going to see in the next few weeks. That's the political side of it. On the policy side of it, what was interesting about the State Department's approval of the $7 billion, what's interesting is they backed off some of the weaponry that would have been seen as more provocative or new. Everything, as I understand it this morning, that's in that $7 billion is already is possessed by Israel. And the delivery of these things won't be until 2028. So it's not like there's going to be, a massive infusion of new weaponry that's going to happen here, even in the next couple of years. So that's where that stands. I really, this thing about the Gaza Strip and making it into a resort area, I will put that into the all-time craziest ideas I have heard in international politics in the last decade. Is it going to happen? Oh, come on. I mean, I just think that is a non-starter. Even Republicans in Congress are going, okay, so nobody tipped us off about this. I don't know. I put that in the crazy category. We'll see where it ends up. I think right now the larger issue, and this is what Trump, I think, was trying to get at, but, certainly did it in a crazy way. And that is what is the rebuild in Gaza actually going to look like? Who's going to take charge of it and who's going to pay for it? That right there is a major, major policy concern. Once we get past what's going to happen here with this temporary ceasefire and the hostages, the rebuild is going to be the really big problem. And I don't yet, Kim, I have not seen, for example, other Arab nations They haven't stepped forward yet and said, we'll take charge of that. Nor has a Western alliance done that. Right now, everybody's pretty mum about that. But that really, to me, is going to be the biggest international, call it a crisis, when it comes to the Middle East going forward.
So CBS did the polling on the president's approval rating and all of the, different issues along the way, and the CBS News YouGov poll indicates that on the U.S. trying to take over Gaza, 13% said it would be a good idea, 47% said this is a bad idea, and 40% say they're not sure. It depends. So more Americans are like, yeah, we don't think we want to get involved in that. And that's interesting because overall, Trump's approval rating is pretty good. He got a 53% approval rating, 47% disapprove, which is interesting because of all the provocative things he's done so far.
Well, I'll tell you what's most interesting. That's the highest approval rating he's ever had. And that's what's shocking a lot of people, right? And conversely, you look at Biden's approval rating when he was leaving office, and he was down in the low 30s. So there has clearly been a political, maybe not, we'll see if it's an ideological shift, right? And how long lasting it is, for example, amongst blue collar working folks. I mean, this is going to be tracked very carefully over the next certainly 6 to 12 to 18 months leading into the next midterm as both parties decide how are they going to position themselves. I mean, Kim, it's remarkable to think about the fact that we are 21 months away from the next election, okay? And that is going to obviously dictate a lot of what happens in the second half of the Trump administration. Because if Democrats can pick up 6, 7, 8 seats in the House, then the brakes get put on big time on the second 2 years of Trump's administration. So, I think these polling numbers are going to be interesting, and people's appetite, let's just put it that way, for what Trump wants to get done in these first 6 to 12 months is going to be tested.
Yeah. One of the things he's done, and this kind of brings my hackles up as well, he has signed an order to establish a White House faith office. And apparently, the whole point of the faith office will be to fight discrimination, anti-Christianity, anti-Semitism, and other anti-religious bias, which sounds okay on the surface. But having a religious office in the United States government, it feels rather, let's step on the barrier between church and state to me.
Yeah. Well, this has been something that, some people lump this into the culture wars, basket. But really and truly, Kim, I think there's been several things over the last number of years that, Jews felt like, as you well know, when the whole October 7th, 2023 incident happened, right, they felt disregarded. They felt neglected. At other times, the Palestinians felt that way, right? Sure. And their faith perspectives. So I think I as objective as I can be about this, I wouldn't be concerned about there being an attempt to institutionalize certainly a particular faith. In many people's minds, it has to do with it's more of a defensive posture. It's more like, look, we feel like our values have either been discounted or ignored, and our faith has been put on the defensive rather than trying to impose something. Does that make sense? I think that's really that's at least the stated aim, and that has been the concern expressed by a lot of folks. I don't see at this juncture an appetite either in Congress or in the broader public to say we are going to advance a particular brand of faith.
See, it feels rather Project 2025-y to me. And apparently the office, which will be inside the White House, will be coordinating with the new Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who Trump said earlier would be named the head of a task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias. And if you look at the whole Project 2025 and wanting to push a Christian agenda, it seems like we're getting pretty close to that.
Well, again, let's see what the office does. Let's see what specific actions are taken. There isn't a lot of meat on those bones yet. All right. So let's see what happens. But it clearly, again, is a response to a lot of sectors. And again, not just Christian sectors in the United States, feeling like religion in total has been discounted or even opposed. So, and there were a lot of voters who expressed that last year in a lot of polling that happened in those areas. And again, it wasn't just Christians. There were people in the Muslim community that felt that way. Certainly, the Jewish community felt
Yeah.
that way. And so let's see where it ends up.
All right. We'll circle back around to this one, Gary Dietrich. Um, Here's speaking of culture wars. Trump did something that seems kind of ego-y, but maybe there's more deep meaning to this one. He said he is ending the terms of multiple members of the Kennedy Center board, and he's creating a new Kennedy Center board with himself as the chair. He said, I have decided to immediately terminate multiple individuals from the board of trustees, including the chairman, because they don't share our vision for a golden age in arts and culture. We will soon announce a new board with an amazing chairman, Donald J. Trump. This is what he writes on Truth Social. It's been said
Well,
that, controlling the culture, the way people think about things, our art, our messaging, all of these things are important to who we are. What's the point of him doing this rather than focusing on, the politics at hand, rather than dipping his hand into the Kennedy Center board?
yeah, well, I think you have to look at this in terms of that larger cultural war kind of issue we talked about. I mean, it's no secret, Kim, in California, that for a long time, and and both sides have known this, that as they say, Hollywood, for example, the music industry have been more favorable towards Democrats and Democratic causes. That has been sort of something that's been taken as a given in politics for decades. Now, it's interesting that over the last 12 months or so, that's really been challenged in a lot of ways, right? And look at the people who took some slings and arrows about that. People like Snoop Dogg, right? They're like, what are you doing wanting to perform at an XYZ, right? I mean, it's been very interesting to see this play out over the last 6 months or so. But, I think the Trump reaction to the Kennedy Center in particular is the fact that, and I don't watch every Kennedy Center performance, I'll be honest with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I can catch them when I have time here or there. But, several of the performers there made some pretty sharp comments, during their performances about Trump, about the Trump administration. And it's a reaction to that. There's no question about that. Again, I think it's going to be, in Trump's view and in Trump's supporters' view, it's going to be an effort to bring what they believe to be more balance in that area. No president wants to be attacked, so to speak, from the stage, from the microphone at the Kennedy Center, a mile from the White House, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's no fun, right? So we'll see where that ends up. Ironically and interestingly, first ladies are traditionally put as honorary members of the board. So
Right.
Melania Trump will be on there now too. And let's see, let's see where this board takes the thing. I mean, I think everybody be concerned if it just takes the other side, right? If now all of a sudden we got people from the stage and the microphone now bashing Democrats, that wouldn't be good either. I think we all hope and envision the Kennedy Center to be a pretty neutral place in the modern political world. Can we get there? I hope so.
The center said in a statement, it's the first time a president has moved to dismiss board members. So it doesn't happen very often. It's
Right.
just another one of these things where it looks like a little thing, and really it carries maybe much more significance.
Well,
Yeah.
it could. I mean, again, let's see. To me, again, I always take the pronouncements and all the verbiage, especially in
Mhm.
politics these days, with a giant grain of salt.
Right.
Here's what we're gonna know, Kim. Who are the nominees going to be in the next couple of years, right? Who's going to actually get on that stage, and what are they going to do or say? That's going to be the proof of the pudding, right?
I'm guessing Lee
And
Greenwood and the Village People. I don't know. Just
well, the village
just
people, the village people are a great example of people going, "What are you doing?"
yeah.
Performing at Trump things. So let's just see. Those people, in their own defense, right, said, "Listen, we're not necessarily agreeing with him about everything, but in these days, you can't do anything except somebody's going to put some politics behind it."
Let's move to California and kind of this interesting back and forth between Governor Gavin Newsom and Trump, because I saw an article in The Hill saying this, that Newsom is taking a friendlier tack with Trump, in the sign of a new political reality. That's the headline. That maybe the approach that Governor Newsom is taking is a friendlier one. He's trying to be, put an olive branch out there. But at the same time, comes this article, multiple articles about California and Governor Gavin Newsom approving $50 million to protect immigrants and defend the state against the Trump administration by basically creating a fund for lawsuits because they know that they're going to need to be suing the Trump administration over and over again. So what is it? Are we friendlier or are we preparing to fight or both?
Yes. Yes. All the above. All the above. You're going to see very aggressive actions by California. By the way, that $50 million is split in half, and it was signed by the governor last week after being passed by the legislature earlier in the week. $25 million in that legal, you call it a legal defense fund. Really, it's a legal protagonist fund. It's aggressively suing the federal administration. 123 times, by the way, California did that during Trump version 1. And the other half of it is
that's not very friendly.
Yeah, right. And the other 25 million of that 50 is for immigrant services that's going to be given apparently through contracts to nonprofits that have already been working with immigrants. And the question there has become, and the question among several legislators in the Capitol in Sacramento was, well, wait a minute, is this going to be used as basically a legal defense fund? They said, no, it's for services to advance, the needs of immigrants. So we'll see where that plays out. I'll tell you one thing really interesting to me. Do you know who the very first Democrat that walked into the Trump Oval Office was in the last 3 weeks? The very first one, Gavin Newsom.
But
Gavin Newsom. It was not. It was not a member of. Well, but hang on. It was not a Democratic member of Congress in the House or the Senate. It was not a Democratic anything else. It was California's governor, the largest blue state in the country.
Yeah.
And that should say something. Okay. Gavin knows very well one simple truth. The federal government funds a huge swath of state programs. It doesn't matter what it is. Most notably now, we know what that is. It's the LA Fire Recovery and Rebuild. All right. And that's why, interestingly, 2 weeks ago, you did not see Gavin Newsom on a conference call with 6 other blue state governors, New York, et cetera, high profile Democratic governors. They were on a call with Chuck Schumer, the Democratic head of the Senate, basically chewing him out that you need to get more aggressive about Trump. Newsom was not on that call because just days later, he was going to walk into that Oval Office and tell Trump, we really need your help in LA and beyond. And I think you're going to see a very interesting tap dance by Newsom, who is going to do everything he can to get all of the federal dollars he can because they're going to need them, not just for LA, but heck, if you ever have any snowball's chance of having this high-speed rail project done in California, it's going to have federal dollars, right? And then the other side of the coin, Kim's going to be real obvious. This is a guy, that is Newsom, that wants to be sitting where Donald Trump is in 4 years. And he's going to be playing a very delicate political, some would call it game, and how he navigates being anti-Trump versus, hey, I got to get stuff done for my state.
What's interesting to me about Governor Gavin Newsom going hat in hand to the Oval Office right now is that he shouldn't have to. Trump came out here. He saw the damage. He saw everything. He knows the people of Southern California need federal assistance. It should just be there. Why did Newsom have to go to Washington, D.C. and grovel and get that money? Is that something that most governors have to do in the time of a crisis?
Well, I'll tell you this. Let me give you an example, okay, that I happen to know quite a bit about in Northern California. Do you remember the big Caldor fire that happened, burned clear up to South Lake Tahoe, hundreds of thousands of acres? Okay, it almost consumed. I was up there the day after they evacuated the entirety of South Lake Tahoe. It was a ghost town, except for, a few other media people and me and the National Guard, right? And what's interesting out of that, President Biden had flown in to the Caldor fire zone, promised that there would be, federal help taken care of, everything. Kim, to this day, there has not been a FEMA declaration for individual assistance for the people whose homes were completely burned down in the town of Grizzly Flats up there, that it was utterly destroyed.
Yeah,
and Newsom Newsom went to Biden's administration. Dianne Feinstein, God bless her, when she was alive and representing the state in the Senate, went. They have not still been able to get that declaration passed. And that was through many years of the Biden administration. So the point is, it is a responsibility of a governor. And sometimes they do have to be very advocacy oriented, because sometimes the disaster dollars, people just think there's a disaster, a giant check gets written, and it's all done. It is not nearly that simple. And so I just want to point out, to be fair about it, that there are other communities in and around the country that are still struggling to try to get what they believe to be their rightful part of federal disaster help.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Speaking of the disasters, there's another potential insurance hike for Californians. State Farm wants an emergency 22% increase in homeowners insurance rates in the wake of these Los Angeles fires. They say if your home, and I think this means anywhere in California, not just in Southern California, if your home is covered by State Farm, the chances are good that you're going to face another 22% rate hike. I say another because we know that these insurance rates have steadily gone up over the last couple of years. The company sending a letter to the California Department of Insurance warning of a dire financial situation in the wake of the wildfires, requesting this emergency rate hike. They want an emergency 15% rate hike for condo owners, 38% rate hike for rental dwellings, 22% rate hike if you own your home. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I have really believed, Kim, that the insurance crisis, that is the home, auto insurance rates have been going up too. We don't have time to probably get into that. But when it just comes to home ownership, everybody knows this. If you have a mortgage, you have to have insurance. Okay. Yep. And that's the bottom line. And even people who don't have a mortgage anymore, some people have dropped their insurance because they feel like they just can't afford the rate hikes. And I personally believe that this insurance crisis, and that's really, we are now on the precipice of a crisis. I think it could become one of the top 2 or 3 political issues in our next governor's race in California in 2 years. I think it is that large scale. It is going to be felt, as you point out, potentially by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Californians. And I think truly we're in a situation now where the political implications of this, as well as the policy impacts, are going to be massive. I mean, on the scale that, Kim, you'll remember back when we had the energy blackouts and brownouts and crisis that eventually led to the first recall of a governor in California in 150 years in Gray Davis. Mm-hmm. And I think we are now politically near that kind of a powder keg.
So the two options, neither option seems good. First, we say, or the state says, all right, go ahead and raise your rates. And then there are people that say, listen, this company has plenty of cash in the bank. This is a money grab by them. They made $1.4 billion in homeowners insurance from 2020 to 2022. They have $135 billion in the bank. This is not an emergency. They don't need this money. But if you don't approve this emergency increase, then maybe do we have another insurer pulling out of California? And can we afford that to happen? I don't know.
Those are the dynamics of the concern, Kim. Yeah. I mean, State Farm is the largest home insurer in California, reportedly about 15% of the policies. They are, by the way, reportedly the largest home insurer in the entire United States. Yeah. And so they have a lot of leverage because of that, right? Because as you say, they could say, well, we just can't afford to do business in this state anymore. And more to the point, we're going to pull out of a whole lot of other, quote unquote, high risk territories around the country. So the politics of this are fraught. You know, how deep does the California Insurance Office dig into their finances and have access to what, and then what, sort of like the PUC has to do with utilities, what's a quote unquote fair return then on their investment? These are all questions that people are posing. You know, the California Fair Plan, we don't have time to get into that in detail, but the government-backed plan of essentially the government sort of insurer of last resort, it too is going to be facing some real challenges as a result of the LA fires. And I'll tell you, this is going to play out in some very major ways in the next couple of years.
When you mentioned, and I didn't have this to talk to you about, but you mentioned the next gubernatorial election in California. Who do you see coming out in this race so far? Who has said they are going to run? And do you think Kamala Harris is going to stick her toe in the pool here in California?
Well, I tell you that the one name we know is not going to run. We learned last week, very high profile name, and that's California's Attorney General Rob Bonta, who said he's going to go ahead. He was widely believed to be very carefully looking at the governor's race, and we'll get into a couple of the other names real quick here in a second. But he said, no, I'm going to run again as Attorney General. We've got lots to do in the Trump administration. So he's already cast his lot with staying as Attorney General if he wins re-election, which probably right now is a reasonably safe bet. But what was interesting to me was, and that was surprised a few people, but more surprising is what he said after the comma. And he said, so I'm going to be supporting, guess who? Kamala Harris if she decides to run.
Okay.
Wow. Oh, wow. Now, why is that a big wow? Because you just have to believe he just didn't decide, wake up that morning, have his fried eggs or whatever he eats for breakfast. And, oh, you know what? When I make my announcement today, I'm just going to randomly throw my support to the former vice president. I highly doubt, and nobody believes that was true. It's probably the strongest indicator we have yet that Harris is likely to run. And if you believe a poll that was done maybe 6-8 weeks ago, right now, she'd be the leading candidate.
Wow. Which is interesting because when you see Newsom trying to play nice with Trump, I don't necessarily know that California is going to be in line for all the, for any perks if it's Harris versus Trump. And Harris has to be the one going into the Oval Office to say, where's my wildfire aid? That'll be an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, no doubt. And of course, the larger question beyond just our election in California in 2 years is she still aiming to go back? Does she want to take another shot at the White House in 28? Oh, I don't know. The current occupant of the California governor's office has his sights set on the 28 election too. So to me, the politics of this are very, very interesting. Is it going to be Kamala Harris versus Gavin Newsom for the 28 nomination, right? I mean, there's a lot of pieces of this that people are going to be watching carefully.
Gary Dietrich, thank you for coming on and having a great conversation with me today. I so appreciate it.
Oh, hey, my pleasure.
Yeah, Mark will be back next week. We'll see you then. Bye.
Okay.
Bye, Gary Dietrich. Gary Dietrich's report is sponsored by Bill Campbell of Remax Gold. You can call or text Bill 530-448-7474. That's 530-448-7474. If you are in the area where Bill Campbell is, this is a great real estate agent. If you're relocating into or from Northern California, looking for a highly respected real estate professional like Bill Campbell, Remax Gold, again, you can call or text Bill 530-448-7474. That's 530-448-7474.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.